It was a quiet Thursday evening, one of those unusually still nights where the house feels more silent than it should. The clock on the wall ticked in rhythm with my thoughts as I curled up on the couch, my legs tucked under a soft fleece throw. I was watching one of those old black and white movies, the kind I used to love when I was younger, the kind that made the world seem simpler. The house had been mine alone for almost 5 years now. Ever since my divorce, I'd grown used to the quiet. I had my routine's early morning coffee on the porch, long walks with my neighbor's golden retriever, and evenings filled with books puzzles, or the television humming in the background. That night, I had just settled into the last half of the movie when the door creaked not loudly, not like in those dramatic scenes you see in thrillers, but just enough to make me turn my head. And there he was. Jason, my daughter's best friend from college. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he helped her move out of our house after graduation. Back then, he was this charming, boyish young man with kind eyes and a quick laugh. Now standing in my living room, soaked from the light spring rain outside, he looked different, older, broader in the shoulders, with a calm, confident expression that I didn't remember. "Mrs. Harper?" he asked, stepping cautiously in. "I'm sorry I knocked, but I don't think you heard me." "Your porch light's flickering. I was just in town visiting my folks and figured I'd check in on you if that's okay." I blinked a few times, trying to catch up. "Jason." "Oh my goodness, of course, come in. Don't stand there dripping all over my rug." He smiled that same easy, familiar smile and stepped inside. I handed him a towel from the hallway closet, and we stood there in that awkward pause that always comes after unexpected reunions. He looked around the living room at the old armchair still covered with the quilt I made years ago, at the pictures on the wall that hadn't changed much since the last time he visited. "You look great," he said, I soft. "I mean, really, it's nice to see you." I laughed lightly, brushing my silver-streaked hair behind my ear. Flattery after all these years. He chuckled and nodded at the TV. "You still watching these old classics?" "Some things never change," I replied. "Want to sit? I'll make tea." We settled in like two people who hadn't spoken in years but shared some unspoken familiarity. He told me about his work, how he moved to Denver but still came back to visit his parents now. And then I told him about my quiet life, the books I was reading, the plants that wouldn't stop growing in the garden, the antique shop I volunteered at once. A week. It was easy comforting, but there was something in the air, a subtle shift, a warmth in the way he looked at me. It wasn't inappropriate, just different, like he saw me not as his friend's mother, but as a person, a woman. At one point, he reached for the mug of tea I'd set on the table, and our hands brushed just a soft, accidental touch, but it lingered. His eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, as if time paused around us. He didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. And then he smiled more, reserved this time, a bit uncertain. "I should probably get going," he said. "Didn't mean to barge in on your evening." "You didn't barge in," I said softly. "It was nice, unexpected, but nice." He stood, and I followed him to the door. Rain still drizzled outside, glistening against the streetlight. "Would you like to come by again while you're in town?" I asked, not even sure why I was asking it, just felt natural. Jason paused, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that." He stepped out into the rain, and I closed the door gently behind him. My heart was beating a little faster than before. I turned back toward the couch, the tea still warm, the movie still playing, but everything suddenly felt different. I sat down staring at the screen, but seeing something else entirely. Something had shifted inside me, a door unopened. For years had creeped open just a little, and I wasn't sure what I would find behind it. The next morning, I found myself lingering over my coffee longer than usual. The early sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting golden stripes across the counter. I stared at the steam rising from my mug and kept replaying last night in my mind. His voice, his eyes. The way his hand had brushed mine. It had been years since a moment like that caught me so off guard I told myself not to overthink it. Case was just being polite, friendly, thoughtful, maybe, but not suggestive. Still, there was something there, something I hadn't felt in a long time, and the truth was I didn't want to push it away around midday. I decided to do something productive to shake the feeling. I pruned my overgrown rose bushes and cleaned out the garden shed as I swept away cobwebs. My thoughts still wandered back to his visit the way he had looked at me. It hadn't been like someone looking at an old friend's mom. It was attentive, curious. By the time I was getting dinner ready, the sky had turned a soft lavender. I was setting a pot of soup on the stove when there was a knock at the door. My heart fluttered instantly, and I told myself again not to jump to conclusions, but it was him. "Hope it's not bad timing," Jason said, holding up a brown paper bag. I brought over some of my mom's homemade bread, figured it would go good with that soup I smell. I blinked. "Come in," I said, a little breathless. Perfect timing, actually. We sat at the small table by the window. The one I usually reserved for myself. We ate and talked again, and the ease from the night before returned like it had never left, but this time it felt even warmer. He asked me questions that went beyond small talk. About my life after the divorce, about the things I still wanted to do. It caught me off guard. How sincerely he listened, how genuinely interested he seemed. At one point, I was telling him about a little coastal town I'd always wanted to visit, and he leaned in slightly. "You've got this way of telling stories," and he said it's calming. I missed that. I felt a flush of warmth in my chest. I couldn't remember the last time someone told me I was calming. Useful, dependable, sure. But calming after dinner, we moved back into the living room. The night had stretched itself out softly around us. I turned on some jazz, something mellow, and we sat on the couch a little closer than the night before. Jason looked at the photos on the mantel, old pictures of my daughter and one of me and her father long before the love had faded. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. Being with someone, I mean. I didn't answer right away. It was such a vulnerable question, but something in his tone made me feel safe enough to tell the truth. "I miss the companionship," I said, "the presence, someone to talk to at night, but I don't miss being invisible." He looked at me for a long time. Really looked, and I felt it again. That soft energy between us, subtle but undeniable. "I don't think anyone could ever overlook you." He said that line, simple kind, hit deeper than I expected. We didn't move closer. We didn't touch. But the space between us changed, grew denser, with something unspoken, fragile and real when he stood to leave. I walked him to the door again. The night air was cool in the evening before, and I noticed him hesitate. "I'm leaving Temp Saturday," he said, "but I'd really like to see you again before then." "I'd like that too." We stood there a moment too long, the kind of pause that used to scare me but now made my heart beat louder. He smiled and stepped into the night, and I stood at the door watching the silhouette of him disappear down the path. Inside, I turned off the lights, sat on the couch, and let the quiet settle in around me. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet anymore. It was a quiet that waited. Saturday came too quickly. The sky that morning was overcast, casting a soft gray light across my kitchen. I moved through my usual routine, but everything felt slightly off, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours, wondering if he'd show up before he had to leave. Part of me questioned why it mattered so much. It had only been 2 brief evenings. We hadn't done anything but talk, but the way I felt inside told a different story. A story I hadn't let myself believe in for a long, long time. By noon, I'd made up my mind I wouldn't wait around passively. I baked a lemon pound cake, the kind I used to make for guests when the house was still full of laughter. I set it on the counter and glanced toward the window, more times than I care to admit. It was just after 2 when the doorbell rang. I didn't rush, though my heart did when I opened the door. There he was, jeans jacket, a slight scruff on his jaw, and that familiar smile, but this time his eyes held something else. A softness mixed with uncertainty. I wasn't sure if it'd be okay to come by, he said. I didn't want to intrude. You're not, I said, stepping aside. You're exactly on time. He walked in slowly, looking around like he was memorizing the space. I offered him coffee and a slice of cake, and we sat at the kitchen table close, but not quite touching for a while. The conversation stayed light, but the pauses between us stretched longer than before. And in those pauses, something kept building. I don't know what this is, he said eventually, his voice low, but these past few days have felt different with you. I knotted my fingers, curling around the mug in my hands. They felt different from me, too. He hesitated, searching my face. Are you okay with that? No one had asked me that in years, not what I wanted, not what I felt. Just if I was okay, I nodded. Yes, I am. We sat in the quiet for a while, letting that honesty fill the room. I've always admired you, he said suddenly. Even when I was younger, you had this way of making people feel safe, seen. And now I see you in a different way, not as someone's mother, just as you. His words landed in places I didn't know were still tender places. I thought had closed for good. I reached out. Then gently placing my hand over his, he turned his, palm to meet mine. Our fingers intertwining naturally, there was no rush, no spark flying wildly, just warmth, familiar, steady warmth that spread through my chest like a slow-moving wave. I don't know what happens next, I whispered, but I don't want this to end with you walking away today like it never happened. It doesn't have to, he said softly. I'll be back in 3 weeks, maybe sooner, and we can talk. Really, talk about what this could be. We stayed like that. Our hands gently clasped, no need to fill the silence with anything more. When he finally stood to leave, he turned at the door. You've been the best part of this visit. My eyes welled up before I could stop them, not from sadness, but from something I hadn't felt in ages, hope. And as the door closed behind him, I realized that even if nothing more ever came from it, something inside me had changed. I had been seen, heard, desired, and I was ready finally for whatever might come next. The days after Jason left were quiet but no longer lonely. There was a shift inside me, subtle but powerful like spring, slowly blooming after a long gray winter. I moved through my routines with more attention, more presence. My morning coffee tasted richer, the air felt warmer. Even the silence in the house felt different. No longer empty but full of promise. I didn't hear from him for a few days, but I wasn't worried. I trusted the connection we had made. And in truth, I needed the space to sit with everything that had stirred inside me one evening. About a week after he left, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed a message from Jason. I made it back, been thinking about, you can I call tonight? My heart jumped. Just like it used to when I was young and falling for someone new that surprised me at my age. I had expected those kinds of feelings to be memories, not present-day experiences. When we spoke later that night, it was like slipping into a familiar rhythm. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about how strange and beautiful it was to find someone unexpectedly, and how rare it was to feel so safe so quickly. I think about that moment on your couch, he said quietly, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. You didn't have to say anything. I just felt you. I let that sink in for so long. I had lived behind a kind of emotional curtain, polite smiles, surface conversations. But with Jason, the curtain had lifted, and I had stepped forward, unfiltered, vulnerable, and alive. Over the following weeks, we stayed in touch. Long calls, little messages, even pictures of his dog or the book he was reading. And then one day he sent a message that made me stop in my tracks. I want to see you again. Not just for a day. Can I come stay for the weekend? I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I doubted my answer, but because of what it meant. Saying yes meant acknowledging that what we had wasn't just a passing connection. It was something we both wanted to explore when he arrived that Friday evening. The hug lasted a little longer. The silence between us was comfortable now. There was no performance, no pretending, just a deep growing affection that had room to breathe. We spent the weekend doing the simplest things. Cooking together, walking by the lake, watching old movies curled up on the couch, but under all of it was a current. Gentle but steady, pulling us closer. On Saturday night, we sat outside, under the stars, a blanket wrapped around our shoulders, a glass of wine in our hands. I used to think I had to be a certain version of myself for someone to love me, I said softly. Thinner, younger, less complicated. Jason looked at me, his eyes full of something steady and true. You're more real than anyone I've ever known, he said. And that's exactly why I'm here. I reached out and touched his face, letting my hand rest there for a moment. The lines around his eyes, the warmth in his skin, the way he leaned into my touch. It all felt grounded, honest that night. We didn't need words, we simply existed in the quiet closeness of something new and beautiful. There was no urgency, no script, just two people at different chapters of life, discovering something rare together when he left the next day. It wasn't painful, it wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something we both wanted to nurture, gently, intentionally. And as I stood by the window watching him drive away, I smiled because love hadn't passed me by. It had simply taken the long way.